Okay, so wanted to pick up today on last week. So I know we had the conversation here last month, but last week, as most of you know, was International Coaching Week. And in Singapore here, our chapter people put together an entire week, 5 days with, I think the first call started at 8:30 in the morning and then finished at about 8:30 in the evening. So 26 and a half hours of CCEU. So we had some amazing presentations and discussions and panels. And one of the ones that got the most applause during the week was from Colleen. And everybody just loved it. And I got fielded a lot of contacts from people after that saying, can we hear more? Can you tell us more? And we had some people who were on this call with us last month who were also listening into some of our sessions last week. So one of the things I wanted to do was just talk a little bit about some of the practicalities of how we teach. We had a lot of people who are in organizations, internal coaches, managers using coaching skills, and the people who work with them. And they were fascinated by the idea of understanding when we use a particular technique as we coach, what's actually happening in the brain. So I've got stuff that I do, and I've got stuff that when I teach it to people, when they're doing those first coaching conversations of, say as a manager, stop being the problem solver to your people, stop being the expert, step up and coach them to solve the problems themselves. What's actually happening? I know what to tell you to do. I know it works. I proved it works and we can see it working. But I think it'd be really interesting to dip in a little bit more into the brain from Colleen's perspective and really see what's happening. So Colleen, can I just describe the simple framework that we teach people for those conversations, and
Sure.
then maybe you can pick up and explain why does that work, what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So first thing we tend to do is, with that insistence that coaching is a future-facing process. So we're not going to go into the past. We don't want to know why you've got the problem. We just want you to know what the future looks like. So the start point is helping people get absolute clarity on where they are now. It's a bit, if you don't know where you are, you can't go anywhere. So the way I tend to describe it is, if we're in a heavy fog and you're wandering around the town center and you've got lost, you can't see anything a yard in front of your face. Suddenly you trip over a taxi, you jump in and you go, thank goodness for that, take me to the airport. He's going to say, I'd love to, but I can't because I have no idea where we are. I don't know which way we're facing. So for me as a coach, you can't go anywhere until you know where you are, until you've got that absolute clarity on where you are now in whatever situation it is. And I think I see a lot of coaches doing is using models which start with, let's talk about your goals. But if you don't know where you are, how can you possibly plan a route to go anywhere? Then having got that, we've then got the sort of the Alice in Wonderland bit. You remember the bit in the books and the movies where Alice is walking through the forest and then the path splits. And at that moment, the Cheshire Cat appears in the tree. And the cat says, oh, cat, I'm so glad you're here. Which way should I go? And the cat says, well, where do you want to get to? She said, I have no idea. It doesn't matter. He said, in that case, it doesn't matter which way you go. So helping people, the second stage for helping them with the coaching is really looking at the future. And what I found works is a detailed exploration of, for everybody in the situation, what's happening differently at a behavioral level. So if you were a fly on the wall, when this problem that you brought to your coaching conversation, when it's fixed, what's happening? What would you see? Who's doing what? So we get a thorough exploration of behaviors for everybody. And then we go to an exploration of what might the emotional content of that be? How would that feel when that happens? Now, what I've noticed is if you do that thoroughly enough, while you're doing it, at a subconscious level, the processing is happening. They're figuring out that for themselves very quickly, what's the behavioral change required to get me there? And there seems to be, talking about the emotion and what it might feel like, seems to trigger something as well, almost like, oh my God, I'd feel stupid not to do that. So I can see the effect, I see what works. I think it would be really interesting for all the coaches to understand what's happening, what's going on in the brain that makes that sort of a process work. So there's the ball. Over the net, yours.
Okay, it's like you've actually got one of those ball machines and you just shot out about 1,000 balls, but I'll try and grab one of them and work with one. Ray must be laughing as well, like, where do we go? So just something that maybe is a little bit of an aside, Tony, what I loved about what you did there in that introduction is you were using metaphor, you were using stories, you were using pictures in order to help us set the stage for what it is that you're doing coaching. And of course, I'm just going to chuck in a little bit of kind of simple neuroscience to that, is that is one of the greatest powers, the use of analogy, metaphor, story, narrative, etc. for coaches. It's leveraging a very important and easily accessible part of our brain, which is our visual cortex. And our visual cortex, it's much more ancient from a phylogenetic perspective than our thinking, rational, processing brain. So it's very easy to access. It also takes up a whole lot more real estate than many of the other structures of our brain. And therefore, we think beautifully in pictures. People are drawn to images. People are drawn to stories, apart from the emotive content. But in actual fact, it attracts our brain. So what you did really well there was attract our brains by telling some stories and metaphors. So thanks for that.
So it's true then that our brains work in pictures?
Well, Tony, if I had to say to you, think about an elephant. Okay, what immediately comes to mind is a picture of an elephant. You're not going to think ELEPHANT. So absolutely, if it's, I mean, it's intuitive, really. And it's also intuitive from a perspective of what is your life experiences. I mean, what are the commencement speeches that you listen to? It's the ones where inspirational people are describing and creating an evocative and a picture in our brains that we can connect to, both from a visual as well as an emotional perspective. And that's what we're doing with coaching. Right. Okay, so
we need to keep our focus on the pictures. Got it. Yeah. Got it. Go.
And I mean, like Ram will really, he'll go into a more perhaps technical, because Ram, I know you always underplay how much you know about neuroscience, but the real technical aspects of the neuroscience behind what it is that we do. But I think for us as coaches to understand it, we don't really, yes, we talk the real biology of the brain, we talk the real functioning of the brain from a scientific perspective, but we need to teach our coaches and perhaps our coachees as well in a way that it's amenable and understandable. Otherwise, we just get swamped with information that means nothing. So I'm going to simplify what is an incredibly complex subject. Okay. And then just going straight, I mean, again, you threw me many balls, but you talk about future focus. We don't look at the past and the reasons for things, but we look at what it is that we want, where it is that we're going. But we start with looking at a situation of our current reality. Now, just remember, it's not a coach's job to understand the current reality. It's a coach's job to help the coachee understand their current reality. And often you'll get a coach who says, well, I know where I am. I know what's going on. It's this and this and this. But in actual fact, our job is to dig, like you use the word subconscious, non-conscious, you can go with, but to dig deeper into what is the first thinking, or what is the thinking that they've already done. I don't want you to sit and explain your situation because you know your situation. So my job as a coach is to, yes, establish that current reality, but do it from a much deeper perspective. You also use the word of looking at it from behavioral, looking at it from emotional. So, and there's many more aspects to that. So our job is to stimulate that much deeper processing, that more reflective kind of thinking rather than the reflexive answer, which is the first thing that comes to mind. So we're really digging deeper into that subconscious, unconscious processing, allowing what the wisdom that is there. Because don't forget, we are creating wisdom all the time. We are gathering knowledge all the time. And a lot of what a coach's job is to do is to bring that wisdom to the surface, allow a person to access it so that they can, in a very gentle, respectful, future-focused way, we'll say why it's future-focused, so that a person is able to start making connections that have not yet been brought to their conscious brain. Does that make sense?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to come in here and maybe throw a bit of a cat amongst the pigeons,
as you do, Ram.
Now, first of all, in a coaching conversation, the general advice is that you start by asking the client, what would you like to see happen in this session? I think the reason that it is done is not about not understanding reality of where this coach, the client is, but it is assumed that there has been a pre-discussion in terms of what needs to happen, and therefore that particular session may be a series of sessions. But if, of course, something suddenly crops up and which is all about the current reality and which has not been discussed before, and I totally agree with what Peter is saying, then everything is related to the present reality or the being state or the here and now state of the client. Irrespective of that, that brings out a very, very powerful way of how we need to shift the way that we coach, or many, as an assessor and a trainer that I see happening is, if let's say, for example, if the clients, you ask the client, hey, don't even ask a question, what is it that you want to achieve? What's on your mind now? Or something very general. And the client starts saying something about, I'm trying this, I'm trying that, it's not working out. And maybe the client says, I'm frustrated, I'm doing something, whatever it is. And typically, believe you me, this is true, because I'm sure both of you are assessors, and the question that very often, except at very high level, mastery level, people ask is, what do you mean by frustrated? Or what's the meaning of challenge? Or something even more trite. What is it that you would like to achieve in the session? And the client is really pouring his or heart out in terms of what he's saying. Now, in that kind of a circumstance, if a coach asks these kind of questions, what they're really doing is to completely put a brake on what the client is trying to do, the emotional state of the client.
Absolutely.
And it's totally ridiculous for that to happen. And that coaches have to get out of that habit. So what it's very simple. Basically, the whole concept of trust, presence, listening, and all for that, and acknowledge what the client is saying, the verbal and the non-verbal. Hey, this is your tone of voice, this is that, whatever it is, and share what you are feeling within when you hear the person, and then move into some kind of a question. Now, if you go into the neuroscience, as you correctly said, the first sensory stuff that is coming up is the visual. Now, very often you hear people saying, especially I try as much as possible to avoid any kind of PowerPoints or anything when I train people, even in virtual classes. So people turn around and tell me, I'm a very visual person, I need to see. My answer to them is, you're not visual, you are visually challenged. That is why you need to see. If you're really visual, like you said, the moment I say elephant, you'll be able to see an elephant. If I'm telling you a concept or a story, you would be able to visualize that from happening. But because you haven't used that sense, you've never really tried to visualize, you've never really tried to create that visualization in your mind. Just like many of us don't listen because we don't use it. As a corporate leader, I was never required to listen. I was only tell people. So it took me a long number of years before I could actually listen to what people were trying to say. So we lose those and we get into what Otto Scharmer calls the first level of listening, the judgmental listening, which is about just supporting what we already know. We don't want to go even beyond that. We don't want to get into the curious. So then effectively what we are doing, we are shutting ourselves out. It is like, for example, if you are blindfolded, if you have earplugs in you, and if you are sitting in a space kind of a stuff, zero gravity space, you still think. You have past memories flooding you. All those are stored, the longer, older term memories right at the back, at the cerebellum, and the nearer term in the hippocampus. And those are flooding you even if you don't see anything. So in a way, sense, you can put somebody in a position where they don't have to have any idea about their present reality, but they can conjure up absolutely multiple issues of what they are facing based on what they see from the past. Okay, that's just another facet. That's why I said I want to put the cat amongst the pigeons. So it is not about even the current reality which is being expressed. In my opinion, this is a continuum, the past, present, and the future. It never is in one. The moment you say present, the present is past anyway. The moment you say here and now, there is no here and now.
Yeah.
You are constantly moving back and forth, back and forth, like a rally. And so
exactly. So that's what I think Tony's saying is that we're not focusing on discrete or concrete. And like you said, I mean, to ask a question like, what do you mean by, I don't know, unhappy or whatever, is limiting their thinking. But what we're doing is current reality is not saying what is happening, but it's the whole expanse of the consciousness and subconscious experiences, that whole that has, like you said, has come up from previous history, from conditioned experiences that are wishes and hopes for the future as well. So Tony, in a way, yes, it's current reality, but it's also the current reality of what I want, what has meaning for me. And that's, I think, what a coach is doing at the beginning of that conversation, Tony, is we're not going in, tell me the facts, because then if it's tell you the facts, it's with that conditioned narrative that I've already processed. We're asking questions to help them think of what is this really about? What is behind this? What are the emotions? What is the experience? How are we limiting ourselves here? What is working for us? What is not working for us? It's a much broader exploration to get them thinking of what they have not yet thought of. And that's, for me, if a coach starts to say, well, it's this and it's this and it's this, I say, I want to know what you haven't thought of, not what you've already processed. That's our job. Get them thinking.
Exactly.
But yes. I agree with you, Ram. It's accessing whole brain. It's not just saying, what do you see or how do you feel? Whole brain thinking.
Yes.
So Tony, now if you were to think of where does your current reality come from?
Where does my current reality come from? So you're referring to this current illusion I have around me.
You said it, I didn't.
It's my perceptions. You know, one of the things I've always found fascinating is when we stop, like for example, when we're teaching people very deep listening from their subconscious, is recognizing that what you see in front of you, you're seeing in front of you. It's an electrochemical signal somewhere in your brain. The light waves come in through the receptors in your eyes and form a picture in your brain. And just getting used to the fact that it's in here, not out there. We just project it to be out there because that kind of makes sense.
No, just to take that
just
off.
Flagged up a question. Can I just pick it up there?
Before that, just to pick up that question. If you, what you see in front of you or what you hear around you or whatever the other senses are, then all of us would be seeing, hearing, sensing exactly the same way. But Donald Trump doesn't think so. So what is it that makes him different? Where does Where does that difference? So what we think we see and what we see, what we think we hear and what we hear are very different things. That's what I meant by, yes, where does the current reality, the illusion, as you said, of the current reality, where does it come from?
And I think very much, Tony, what you're talking about is that non-dualistic perspective of the world out there and us here. It's about
yes,
that all that exists is how we are processing it. It's not a concrete external reality, but it's a way that we are experiencing that reality, and that can be influenced by brain structure. It can be influenced by our own DNA and our own historical biological inheritance. It can be influenced by the conditioned experiences we have, expectations, the neurochemical processes that we've been exposed to, or are naturally inherent in our biochemistry. So for me, that question of where does the current reality come from, I'd say let's take a year to have this conversation, because that's I think the depth or the quality gives us quality in terms of that current reality assessment. I agree with you, Ram. It's not just an objective, what is going on. It's actually about how are we experiencing it in a completely holistic way, from past, future,
and perception.
But at a very simplest level,
your perception is your reality, right?
Absolutely. Now, where does that perception come from? The perception, yes, it is made up of all these factors, but at the simplest level, the perceptions are a product of your conditioned memories. I mean, they could come from various sources. How exactly they are created, your DNA, all that might take PhD theses. But the fact is that it is your memories, which are either the long-term memories or the short-term memories, which trigger the responses to what you sense through the visual, auditory, other sensors. And it presents to a part of the brain by the wired connection between the limbic and the frontal cortex as to what our thoughts are. Now, that is what I'm talking about. And therefore, if that is a pathway, and I'm not talking about dualistic, non-dualistic, Maya, illusion, all that stuff, but just a straightforward kind of connection, which then implies that you might be able to reframe it, which is what we do in coaching. All coaching is about reframing. All psychological processes are about reframing current reality, and that's what helps. So what does involve neuroscience-wise in terms of reframing is the next question.
Okay, a big question. I could throw some cats and pigeons now. So what do we mean by reframing? And exactly, Ram, that's what you're saying, is we are helping to find connections that have not yet been made. We don't just want to hear a repetition of what has been the thinking that has always been there. So our job is to ask people to think from things which make them think. In other words, it makes them process and make new connections, novel connections, in a way that they haven't done before. So my cat that I'm going to throw amongst the pigeons, and it just is something that bounced into my head right now, something a little bit different here. But don't forget, it's not only what that person is going back into in their own brain and their own conditioned experiences, biochemistry, neurobiology, or whatever, but it's also the influence of the coach. Okay, don't forget mirror neurons. Don't forget the particular questions that are being asked. All of those are very powerfully triggering what needs to be triggered. So it's not just open. It's actually the coaches are helping to create the space for that person to feel safe enough to be able to access different kinds of thinking, to ask the kinds of questions that help a person create constructive new connections, rather than just revisiting pre-existing top of mind ideas.
Yes. So I mean, it is the art of coaching, I think, is just the process of helping people to think. And we know that the further down into the subconscious they go, the faster the processing happens. And to me, that's the essence of it, triggering thinking. There was a question. Can I just pick up on a question that came up in the chat there? Somebody was, when I think Ram had made the point about not reflecting on meanings. So when you're coaching somebody and when they use words that contain values and emotions behind them, So if somebody says, I'm frustrated, what I mean, and what I think maybe Ram was saying there, was you don't ask them, what does frustration mean to you? Because then you're getting into dictionary definitions, because the meaning of the word is actually not that important. What's important is the connection down in their brain, in their mind, that that word has. So the word is like a trap door. You just poke it. So at a very simply, if you want to really push them down in their subconscious to that deep emotional level where the beliefs are sitting, and it's the belief about a situation that's holding them back anyway, so that's what you've got to hit and break through, you would simply say, tell me more about frustration, or talk to me about frustration. And sometimes when you do, the context of what they go and talk about will change completely, because all these things were linked. Frustration just happens to be the word. Now, we know coaching is the one interaction that cuts across all cultural boundaries. Individuals work, their brains work the same way on an individual level, no matter what country you're coaching in. And I can say that confidently because I've done them, right? But also from a practical level, if you're working, say, with multinationals, people operate in their own office in their local language, but they operate internationally across the business in English. And you get some amazing differences in how they use a word. So I'll give you an example. We had one client years ago who it was a North European company, not native English speakers, but in English, they expressed one of the company values as to be humble. And when I was teaching their leadership team in Japan, the Japanese were looking at that. It doesn't translate. Why would we want to be humble? That's like a little creepy Mr. McCauberish. Yeah, humble doesn't sound like a good thing. When we got the head office people to describe what behaviors they were looking for, the Japanese went, oh, you mean collaborative. And the reason that one came up was because this particular Northern European nation, most typically when they go around the world and in their multinational environments, get described as being arrogant. So they just picked the word that was the opposite of arrogant. So if you get caught up in the meanings of the word, you're going to get tripped up with red herrings everywhere, and particularly when you work internationally. So it's the connection. And I saw Colleen nodding when I said that. So you just poke the word. I can't think of a more technical way to explain it than that. Poke the word, it's a trapdoor. It will take you down to the real stuff that's going on underneath. Is that making sense, Colleen?
Yeah, be curious and allow your coachee to be curious as well in a completely non-threatening way. And Tony, I would challenge you to a certain extent, because there definitely are cultural differences in terms of brain structure and function, even from birth. So, but I agree with you, because where it doesn't matter whether there's cultural differences or historical differences, the fact of the matter is that as a coach, we are present with that human's brain and with how they process. So we don't need to make any assumptions about the way they think or what would be useful. And that's the art of great coaching, is allowing the coachee to own the conversation and to be that catalyst. Somebody used the catalyst word there, or the I call it the sacred space, for that person to explore their own thinking in a way that they haven't yet done.
Yeah.
I mean, coming back to this words, dictionary meanings that you talked about, Tony, all the more reason is, whether it is cultural differences or even otherwise, what if we as coaches, let's say if somebody says frustration, you listen more into the tonality of the voice of what the client is expressing in some other ways, and maybe ask the person, what is it that you're sensing now? What's happening in your body? And what does that denote as an emotion? And let the client describe rather than interpret the literal meaning of that word. And how would that lead? And Charles is asking question, in what way can the coach play a part in the current reality? The way that the coach can play a part in the current reality is, I think, which cuts across all cultures, is empathy. And empathy is what triggers off the mirror neurons and various other kinds of stuff that happens from a collective sense as well. Now, the next question really is, how does a coach initiate empathy? How does the coach establish empathy? What needs to happen? Those are the deeper things about how does a coach has to respond, to which hopefully the client will respond in a different way or whatever way. So those are the issues that come in. So over to you.
I'll give you chuck in a little bit of neuroscience here. And that's an interesting one, Ram, because what comes first? Does, you know, the cat or the pigeon, okay, or the cart, does the cart come before the horse? Because is the biology orientating us towards empathy, or can we craft empathy? And I think it's a both and. I mean, if we look at the mirror neuron system, and a lot of the research on the mirror neuron system has shown that autism has been, or it's often been designated as broken mirror syndrome, where the parts of the brain that are effective in experiencing the visual and sensory experiences of another person actually is dysfunctional can be dysfunctional, because autism is not always the same in an autistic brain. So do we have a profound developed mirror neuron system that allows us to be empathic, or can we also facilitate it the other way? And it seems that the research is showing that we can do both. So we can teach empathy, and we ourselves can learn empathy. Firstly, mirror neuron system. Secondly, which part of our brains are we automatically using when we are in relationship with another person? It's usually self-referential. Medial prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that we interpret what happens to us. And because coaching is all about becoming conscious as coaches. In other words, not just doing what we do on automatic. So everything is not self-referential. That's, for me, is what is so unique about the coaching relationship. For one, somebody is not referring everything back to themselves. So instead of being self-referential, we are other referential. And in other words, that's the empathic parts of our prefrontal cortex that is not necessarily everything to do with me. So again, we're engaging with how do I feel and respond, but actually how can I separate myself from it and be present with you for the benefit of your thinking and your development.
Colin, as I hear you, one thing that comes up for me is, when we know that we cannot train somebody to fall in love with somebody, but we do expect the coach to make the client fall in empathy with the coach, how does that work from a neuroscience point of view?
So you're saying for the coachee to fall in empathy with the coach?
Yeah, the client.
Well, again, yeah, what you don't forget, in terms of a mirror neuron system, often the person who's dominant, okay, I'm advisedly putting inverted commas around that word, holds the mirror to the relationship. So in a sense, the coach holds the space, okay, for the coaching relationship, and therefore it is important that the coach actually holds that mirror and comes from a perspective of this person has got capacity, this person has wisdom, this person has the ability. We love our coachees. We adore our coachees. That is our responsibility as a coach. And therefore, we are setting up that reciprocal kind of back and forth relationship where, I mean, you know, just to be in a relationship where somebody completely believes in you. And this is not, for me, la la land crazy, I just love you and I think anything's possible. It's neuroplasticity. I know everything's possible. I know you have the capacity to achieve whatever it is you need to achieve. Absolutely. It's a fact. It's a biological fact. And I'm not talking about I can become Roger Federer as a tennis player, because obviously there's genetic capacities. But generally speaking, whatever my client wants, whatever they want to achieve, they're only going to want it because they've got the capacity to achieve it. And therefore, I believe in them 100%. Whether they achieve it or not, or how they limit themselves, that is incidental to me. Well, not incidental, because obviously we deal with it, but it doesn't talk to the fact that they are perfectly magnificent, capable, resourceful, full of possibility.
If that is the case, and let me go take one step further, I'm too old for it. I'm not sure about Tony, but many of the younger people here in the audience, so they can persuade somebody to fall in love with them, if they can persuade their coaches to fall in empathy with them.
If you can control the dilation or contraction of your pupils, it's very easy to make people fall in love with you. But I've been trying for quite a long time. I haven't yet achieved that.
It just doesn't work, does it? No.
Definitely, people respond. That is one of the greatest determinants of liking, is contraction or dilation of pupils. But Ram, I mean, we can go to that one little thing. Sorry, Tony, I'll come back to you. But there's hundreds of thousands of pieces of data that we are interpreting when we're in presence with another person. And I think what we're learning in coaching, that's why coaching, we never stop learning to be good coaches, is that we're learning to manage at a subconscious, intuitive level, all those hundreds and thousands of pieces of data that creates a connected state, that creates a willing state, and allow coaches to engage in the conversation. Sorry, Tony, I was overriding you there.
Oh, yes.
No, Tony's upset that
I was going to ask something and it went.
Fall in love.
Ah, yes. Okay, so maybe we'll skip over that subject. I'll come back there. Just wondering, in the question box, we've got a question from Sindhu, who's saying, in reference to the example of frustration, to challenge thinking or change the perception and trigger thinking in the coachee. How do you do this without leading? In this context, is it really possible to come up with questions based on pure curiosity without being leading at all? Yes, is the answer to that. Yes, it is possible. Because one of the things I was going to say about the empathy, we had this very conversation a couple of times last week on the Coaching Week Symposium. We had a session at the end of the week with like 6 MCCs talking about what does mastery mean, and it really all hinges around getting out of the way. So I'm not going to go in there to make somebody fall in empathy with me, but by getting myself and my ego and I have no agenda other than to help. And going back to what Colleen said just now, the way I express it is, barring physical limitations, anybody can do anything they want to. You've just got to learn some stuff and practice it. And yes, intellectual capacity, brain function is a physical limitation. But barring those physical limitations, anything is possible. Learn some stuff, practice it. And when the magic bit happens, when you as a coach have that absolute belief and you sit down and you connect with somebody, they just get it. Because you're not going there and saying, I believe you can do this. You're saying, I know you can. And it's that shift to that, I know this is possible for you, that just lights them up. So that's the place you've got to get to. And neuroplasticity is real. They can. So just going back to Sindhu's question about where do the questions come from? The question, the very thing we had a session on last week, is about learning to coach from a subconscious connection, getting out of your own conscious awareness, because your subconscious contains the processor and the database. It's your entire body of experience. And at the speed of thought, it responds to whatever comes up from the person. So when I go into a coaching conversation, I have no idea what questions I'm going to ask. Each question just comes from whatever just came up. Something they said, the way they breathed, a little flicker of a muscle somewhere. And you have to learn to get out of your own conscious awareness and just allow it to come up. And when you do that, that subconscious level connection actually starts taking you a little bit to the next level, which is creating that real physical E equals MC squared energetic level connection with people, where you start picking up signals on a different wavelength.
Tony.
I hope that answers your question, Cindy.
So just in terms of that, I think you're absolutely talking everything that is completely the power of coaching. But I don't think that we as coaches, I don't believe that this is a default intuitive kind of automatic space that we are used to accessing. And that's why it's difficult for new coaches to just sit back, be relaxed, and not have to think of the next great brilliant question. Because what you've done, and it's part of your DNA now, is that you have spent years and years and hours. That's why we have to do so many hours to get the ICF accreditations. It doesn't just happen. We can't just read it in a book, but we have to wire it within ourselves. And you've got to a mastery level where you're able to be intuitive. Now, intuitive for me is not something magical and mysterious, although I'm not talking the philosophical and spiritual aspect here. I'm just talking neuroscience, okay? So it's not some ancient ancestor coming and whispering a secret into your ear to be curious about this with your coachee. What it actually is it's layers and layers and layers of wisdom that you've established over the years that allows you to just trust that wisdom and in that moment come up with the curious prompt or question or connection. So once again, I think it's important for us as new coaches or as experienced coaches to understand that we are constantly layering our own subconscious and unconscious in how to be present as a coach. Graham, I don't know if you agree with me, but I don't think, and maybe this is just conditioning, but our conditioning does not allow us to be intuitively forward-focused, other-focused, leave our own opinions aside. It's not our way of being.
No.
So you've learned how to be that.
No, first of all, conditioning is not intuitive. Conditioning is instinctive. It's a reverse of that, but that apart. And one thing that you said just now strikes me, and I'll go back to what Tony said. I don't think there's anything called new coaches or old coaches. Every time any of us sit in front of a client, you're not knowing anything about what's going to happen. So you are a new coach. You are seeing with new eyes. You are hearing with new ears. Everything is new. And that is really what I think Tony was saying, that if you're able to get into that state of not knowing, the total childish curiosity, and to be able to look at it. My favorite example is the Dalai Lama. From that kind of a sense and a spirit, if one is able to hear and sense another person. But the question that I have then, what comes up is, then we talked about it before Tony came in. And last time also, I think somebody raised it. What is it about then a client being uncoachable? How can it ever happen? We have a saying in Coacharia saying, the coach is unclientable, but not that the client is uncoachable. How would you respond to that?
So I remember years and years ago, first 5 minutes I got exposed to coaching, people talking about this sort of non-coachable. I think the word should be ripped up and thrown away, right? You cannot coach somebody who is not willing and open to change. That's all. Everybody is coachable, provided they actually want to change. If they don't want to change, then they're not ready for coaching. And one of the best things a coach can learn to do is to spot it, because you do get some people as individuals hiring a coach themselves who actually don't want to change. They just want somebody to reassure them that they were right all along and the world's against them. You get people where the organization hires you to coach them, and they're very good at saying, sure, boss, yes, I'll have a coach, let's work on that. And they have no desire to change. The most powerful thing you can learn to do as a coach is to sort of be able to detect whether there is a willingness to change or not, then call it out. And it for me, an example, because I get to talk to a lot of newer coaches who struggle with situations like this. One of the first things I'm looking for where an organization engages me to coach somebody is I've got a very strict intake process. I will talk to the sponsor and understand what's going on. I'll talk to the HR business partner and get the perspective overall. And then I talk to the individual. And if anything tells me that they're really not willing to change, I will just call it out. And on the few occasions it happens, 99% of the time we get it fixed immediately, because it's as simple as, you know, we say as a coach, if you sense it, call it. So I would just call out and go, okay, so here's the thing. We spent the last 45 minutes having a chat. One of the things you need to think about for the next 24 hours is what you're going to tell HR or your sponsor after they discover that I'm not going to coach you. And they go, huh? Well, you know, here's the truth. And you just reflect back what's happening. I'm not detecting any willingness to coach. Therefore, I'm not going to even engage in the process. Usually you get some furious backpedaling. They go, whoa, could we just talk about this a bit more? You go, yes, of course we can. And at that point, the shell of the nut cracks. And then they start to just relax and open up a little bit more. And suddenly you've got them going deeper. You know, we have this duty to be connected with that absolute knowing that they can do stuff, but call it. And that's the greatest way. I know we're changing the competencies, but when I was an assessor, one of the things I used to find was that the majority of people who failed higher level coaching exams was they hadn't got comfortable with, I think, competency 7, direct communication. You know, that's the one that has all the magic in it. Just observe and explore, calling it like it is. Yeah.
And also bringing in that in terms of coachability is it's not our job to determine whether are you coachable or not, because I agree with you, Ram, I think it's an overused term, but actually to provide that space that truly believes in a human being, that Rogers' person-centered approach that we love so much, you know, that this is all about them, and we believe in them. And then also that it's not just about what is it that you do, but it's actually a much deeper approach to be helping you to access yourself, your purpose, your wisdom, your the meaning within you. And I think sometimes it's just that shift. Yes, there might be an objective outcome that has to be met in order for the organization or the sponsor, whatever, to be satisfied that there's a return on investment. But if we focus on what is a little bit deeper than that, than just that external outcome, then it's very rare that a person is not able to go there. I don't, you know, it's up to us to provide that space, and then it's the coach's willingness to enter that space or not.
Yeah. Colleen, I like that. I've got a question for you. Ram Charan has asked, and I think he's referring to the thing, you know, the presence that we talk about in the competencies, that the coach has to be fully present. And he's asking, how does the present moment's awareness catalyze increased neuroplasticity? So if we're working on that state of being fully present with our client, what's happening in the brain?
So yes, I mean, I think that's exactly everything that we're talking about. Is that what we're talking about is our job as a coach is to help a person become present to curiosity of new thinking, to their, like Ram says, what is happening in your physiology, that whole interbeing, that whole connectedness of everything that we are. And that's where we can only access that in a present-centered state. What is the alternative to a present-centered state is a future-focused or past-focused state. Now, we're not talking about current reality here. We're not talking about future focused as in goals. What we're talking about is narrative. So when that person is in that narrative state, which is the default state of the brain, which is the automatic answer, the automatic response, the conditioned response, or even the biological, the sympathetic nervous system fight, flight, or freeze response. When we're helping them get into a present state, we are sidetracking those narratives, and we're helping them to get into a place of wisdom, into a place of beingness, if you will. I know I sound a little bit romantic there. And when we're there, when we're in that place, then people can come up with novel connections. Then people can come up with deeper alternative ways of thinking, which is facilitating neuroplasticity as opposed to hardwiring the existing neural pathways for, I mean, it's more complex than that. So that present-centered state It's also helping a person become conscious, because when we're in the present sentence state, we're in a conscious state as opposed to an automatic default state.
So let me ask the follow-up question, my lord. What about from the other side? Because we teach coaches that we have to learn to be present, right? So I think two questions I've got. What's happening in the coach's brain when they are being present with the client, when they're demonstrating that quality? And in order to trigger whatever happens in the brain, is there anything specific that somebody can do to make that easier to achieve, that being present?
What a coach can do.
Colin, before that.
From the coach, yes, what can the coach do?
From what I understand, the way that ICF or coaching competencies term as presence is not really about being in the present state. It's about being in partnership. ICF clearly defines that. So what we talk about are two separate things. Being in the present state is a completely different state, which Colin is talking about. You could call it a neutral state. It could be a disengaged state where you don't let the past or the future influence you. You are just being in that state of awareness, supreme awareness. But when you talk about a coaching presence, or like executive presence, is something different, which implies that you are able to somehow impress people with your gravitas or charisma, whatever. That presence means something else. We have a few minutes more, but if that is something, that differentiation Colleen would like to address.
I'm not sure, I don't even know what the time is. And I think I love the distinction that you make, and I think it's important to make that distinction. However, what I do believe is that our ability to be present as a coach, because you asked as a coach, Tony, and to get out of our conditioned beliefs, narrative perceptions, etc., allows us to deepen that gravitas, to deepen our presence. I agree that it's two separate things, but I don't believe they're completely separate. I think the one underpins the other. In fact, there's probably a mutual reciprocal relationship between two. And Tony, just so a simple answer, Rams, honoring what you've said about there being a difference, I think how we can, as coaches, if we can get out of our conditioned thinking and be completely present with our coachee, I think that then we can access intuition, we can access humor, we can access lightness, we can access all of those presence qualities that add to our competency and our ability to.
In fact, in the olden days, I think, Tony, you've been an MCC far longer than I. There used to be a qualification in the ICF specification saying the invisible coach. That is a level of mastery. So I always say that a coach is present when the coach is absent. That means the ego is absent, the judgment is absent.
Ego, exactly. And ego is narrative.
The ego and the judgment, right? So yes, that also in a way takes you into the present moment, but I think there are very, very distinct differences. We just have about 3 minutes. Any last words from either of you?
Sure, only last words, that's awful.
Not for another few decades.
I'm just deeply grateful for the opportunity to make the connection to the neuroscience, but we're not doing it as something abstract, Ram, which I love what you're creating here. We're doing it as something as how can we leverage our knowledge of the brain just to deepen our capacity as coaches, so that it's not the science and the art, although that's what I always describe. It's about how do we unify our knowledge of human functioning, but then how do we actually leverage that, and how do we integrate? I love this opportunity. Tony?
And for me, I was born in the days where you had to change gears in your car yourself. The person who understands how a gearbox and a clutch and an engine work doesn't crunch the gears. You're a better driver if you understand your machine. And I think the same is true with coaching. The better we understand what's going on inside there, what's going on in this thing we call the brain, I think that it makes it easier for us to be better coaches.
Thanks, both of you. It has been tremendous. We will get back again in this forum at an advanced version of how we want to take this forward, deeper into the brain, as it were, or even quantum science and so on. There are so many interconnectedness. So once again, thank you both. Thank you very much for being here, and the entire audience for being here. Magda, would you want to come out, be visible, and conclude the session?
I am back and I'm visible. Yeah, thank you guys so much. Neuroplasticity is so cool. Like, I'm learning so much. And normally there's comments in the chat, but today I've also been getting some text messages and things from people because they're watching on YouTube and they're loving it. So thanks to our lovely speakers today. For anyone who wants to claim their CCEU for this session, I will place it again in the chat. Head over to learn.coacharya.com, and there you will find, in the CCEU section, you'll find today's webinar, and the password is Wonder Women Wednesdays, to remind you to please nominate your Wonder Women and to watch the interview with Colleen and support the women in your life, because we're pretty freaking cool. So, and without us, you literally wouldn't be here.
My only suggestion to you is, whenever you deem it worthy to start not so wonderful men, think of us, Tony and I.
Maybe. Men are wonderful too. I'll think of, you can be magnificent men. Yeah, the password is Wonder Women Wednesdays. And just because everyone's still here, we do have other webinars. We have branched out to a lot more cool topics. For example, tomorrow, there's 2 different things happening, which we hope you can join us for. We have our support group, which is not recorded, not webinar, but basically a session where you can come and vent or listen or share or whatever. We always have coaches on call to moderate the session. Sometimes it's just a discussion around something that's happening, that's coming for people. So I highly encourage you to just check out coacharya.com/events. You will see all the upcoming stuff. And the other thing that's coming up tomorrow is our fourth webinar in the Parenting with a Coaching Mindset series. That one has been so cool. It's we've brought together, Leah, who's one of our learners and our youth mentor coach partner, Leah has brought together moms and teachers and coaches and youth workers for different topics around parenting that all started off because everyone's dealing with different stuff during this COVID-19 craziness. But the topics they're addressing are relevant to any time in our lives. So please come tomorrow. Tomorrow's session is actually focused on the parents. We've done another session on young children, another one on teenagers. Last week's was amazing on difficult conversations, which frankly applies to also dealing with your parents, not just your kids. But I highly encourage you to please attend that session. It'll be live on YouTube if you're watching us on YouTube right now. So one more time, the passcode for CCEU, because I see people asking, is Wonder Women Wednesdays. And please go to learn.coacharya.com to claim your CCEU. And please go to coacharya.com/events to join our other webinars. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Magda. Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Colleen.
Okay, thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.